Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Comic Source Comic Boom collaboration. Today, we're going to talk about the latest release from Best Jacket Press. We talked about the first issue. Now we're here to talk about the second issue of Clear, which is from writer Scott Snyder. We've got Francis Manapul on art, and a very, very different feel. At least I felt like than the first issue. And I guess I should mention And World Design does the letters. And when I say Francis Manapul's on the art, he's doing the line work and the colors. So still enjoying this series. Thought it was pretty solid overall. The second issue didn't quite blow me away as much as the first issue did, but I feel like that's because the next issue is going to really knock our socks off. It was a bit of setup in this second issue, and I'll talk a little bit more what I mean by that in a second, but I want to get Rocky's initial impressions of this second issue. What'd you think, Rocky?
Well, I liked it because it sort of the first issue sort of gave us the general concept of and the premise of the story, this idea. I mean, Clear sort of referring to this veil, this I guess this the way that everyone's connected to the internet, and everyone has a veil that they can live out their fantasy. When people look at the world, they can see whatever the world they want through the internet, through high tech. And literally your world is exactly what you want it to be through these different veils. And there was a lot of references in the first issue about what the history of the veil was, and it sort of alluded to it. It introduced us to this character Dunez and his wife, who his wife Kendra McHale, who works for the Department of Connectivity, and her job is to ensure that people are able to connect adequately to the internet in their minds through the high tech. And it's the DOC that she works for, and she ends up getting she loses her life. She ends up being murdered in the first issue, and so it's suspicious, the circumstances of her murder, and her husband Dunez here is investigating it. This issue is good because it gives us some background. I like that we learn more about something called the Red War, which is something that preceded the advent of the veil. And the Red War was essentially World War III. Although America lost World War III, apparently. China invaded, and apparently China and Russia had better tech than the U.S. And following World War III, even though the Americans don't call it that, that's when the veil sort of took over, gained popularity all over the globe, and particularly in the United States, even though the U.S. is one of the last holdouts to really embrace the veil, this new technology that sort of creates fantasy worlds for people who embrace it. And just how the entire culture has sort of become subsumed by the power of the veil. And this issue, what I like about this is that it moves the story forward in a way where Dunez, he talks about his own history. He was a soldier in the Red War. He got injured. He had a head injury. And that's how he met his wife, Kendra McHale, who was a nurse who works with head injury patients, apparently, because I get the impression that Dunez, because of his head injury, it impaired his ability to fully connect with a veil, like with the high tech. And that might be something that maybe gives him an edge in this particular story. At least that's maybe the impression I got. But in any event, I found it interesting that he met his wife, who was a nurse, she helped nurse him back to health. They fell in love, and ultimately, that's their background. That's the past. Flash forward now, she's murdered. He's investigating her murder. He ends up going to the Department of Connectivity. He talks to the director of the DOC, this director union, and this director sort of tells him, shows him a number of things, and in particular, he shows him this great big, beautiful, massive tree, and we get some more clues about this veil, how it works, and that the older the older something is, like for example, this old tree, this 250-year-old tree that's the centerpiece of this great big huge corporate building of the DOC, it's one of the only thing that's real. It's harder to cloak or to create an illusion around something that is old and actually real. It's harder to cloak and create a veil around those things. And but one of the things that Dunez's wife was very passionate about was keeping the distinction between fantasy and reality there. And the good thing about the older something is, the easier it is for these things, the easier it is for people, outside observers, to distinguish between, okay, this is fantasy and this is real. This is what I'm seeing in the veil, and this is actual reality. And of course, you can imagine that obviously knowing what those distinctions are very important. And that's what the Department of Connectivity, the DOC, helps to establish. And Director Union knows that Kendra, Dunez's now deceased wife, she was really passionate about that and keeping those distinctions there. And it's the clearly the metaphor here is, I mean, again, I mean, we talked earlier when we talked about We Are Demons. Writer Scott Snyder here is just excellent at dealing with the metaphor here. And again, the metaphors are nothing new and the themes are nothing new, but the way that he approaches them is just, wonderfully, in my view, wonderfully fresh, not necessarily unique. We've gotten these sort of takes on reality before. Like, I guess you could say this is almost like almost like Matrixy in some kind of way. But I really like the themes here. The idea that the distinction between fantasy and reality, and the idea of a shared veil, and shared veils can create massive hallucinations where there's mass suicides. And so shared veils, that is illusions that affect more than just one individual, they're outlawed, and they're outlawed for very good reason. And this leads the lead character here, Dunez, on an investigation to try to find out what went on. And he ends up confronting a gang called 1518, which is named after which is named 1518 was a year where there was a dancing plague. That was the first recorded mass illusion in history that led to a bunch of massive death because people had a sort of a mass hallucination. And so this 1518 gang is something that might know something about Kendra McHale's death. And I really like this. He's clearly he feels distraught. I like the characterization. He's upset. Kendra left him something. She left him some clues about a yellow-eyed man. And she kept some notes, and he's not really sure how to make sense of all of it. But Scott Snyder here is building a mystery, and whether or not this mystery is going to pay dividends is we'll have to see how this plays out, because a good mystery is one where a writer gives us clues and a mystery is possible. And as long as this mystery is capable of being solved without us being told what it is, even though it'll be revealed at the end, the best mysteries are the ones where we, the readers, are giving enough clues that we could piece it together if we have to. And I like that Snyder so far here seems to be giving us a lot of clues, both in the narratives and in the interplay between the characters. And we're just at the end of issue 2. So this issue ends with another cliffhanger like the first one did. And I really enjoyed this, and I love the themes, and I'd really be interested to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think maybe part of the reason that I didn't enjoy this issue quite as much as I did the first issue was it's a little depressing, I suppose.
Yeah,
Um,
it is true,
in
yeah.
in that very well maybe purposeful. I'm not I'm not thinking in terms of well, the U.S. would never lose the Red War or anything. That actually reads very realistic to me. This idea of a Red War where we're so arrogant in our assumptions of who we are as as a country and as a people, that we're actually sort of excited. It's hinted by Dunes that it's unspoken, but we're actually excited after all these years of infighting, fighting each other in the U.S. to have a common enemy and focus that sort of vitriol outward. But again, here comes that sort of patented U.S. arrogance It
Yeah.
makes us think we're so much better than everybody else, which you have a unique perspective, Rocky, because what are called our
Well,
friendly neighbor up there in Canada, but you're not American, so you're kind of what I'm talking about when
yes, we
there's
Canadians always joke that Americans, you start the wars and then you leave, and then we send our peacekeepers in to clean up the mess.
yeah, right. So that reads very, as much as it's depressing, it does read very realistic that we would fire these weapons, and come to find out most of the components of these weapons, they're all smart weapons these days, or they're all made in China or Eastern Europe, and of course they sabotage them, right? And the weapons, the missiles, the bombs, and what have you, turn around and come back on our own forces. And so tail between our legs, making excuses. Oh, it wasn't a world war. We'll just call it the Red War, even though everybody
Yeah.
else calls it a world war. And we'll go home, tail between our legs, and we won't admit that we lost. We'll just say, we didn't have as many allies as we used to. We really needed to focus on us. We needed to focus on the U.S. itself and not be a part of this war. When in reality, we got our butts kicked. So it gives a lot of context to sort of the downfall of the U.S. and how sort of the reality of losing that war would reflect on us. Like, look at the chaos and the fallout from Vietnam. We're to some extent still dealing with that loss, and it's in my mind has fed into other wars that we shouldn't have got involved in, especially the invading of Iraq in the early 2000s, Afghanistan, which we were it wasn't necessarily called a war, but we were an occupying force there for decades. Um, war is not it's not like it was, but I think still in this country, war is to some extent romanticized. I mean, we call the generation of young men that fought in World War II, well, and women as well that contributed. We call that the greatest generation, right? So there's this idea of heroism and becoming a part of something bigger than yourself. That connectivity that we talked about, with We Have Demons, uh, issue number 2, that review that, I'm sorry it didn't come out same week the book came out, but go and check it out, because we talk a lot about connectivity and how all that matters. But I think that idea of connectivity being part of something bigger than yourself, it's a for the most part it's a positive thing. But when everybody feels like they're part of something else, and what they're a part of isn't actually based in reality, that's where things can start to go sideways. When you start talking about things like mass delusions, and it's mentioned here. I love that Snyder brought it up, the dancing virus of 1518, which they're still, back then they didn't have the sort of science and technology we have now, so nobody quite knows what happened. The speculation is it was some sort of like food poisoning, like maybe because it affected a lot of people in one area, so maybe there was some sort of fungus or something that got into some food, and everybody ate that food. They were having these hallucinations. They were dancing. We're not even sure how many people it killed and whatnot, but it's on record as being this just abnormal event, right? But when you talk about where we are in the world right now, I find it very interesting to think about the idea of connectivity, or um, the the greatness of war, the romanticization of war. You want to be a part of that, and how that, when you look at it now in context of the real world, are we fooling ourselves? I think there is a little bit of that. There's a little bit of, obviously the story clear is set in the future of the U.S., but there's a little bit of that idea, at least the way I look at reality right now, or this country. People have their heads in the sand.
Yeah.
People are in some ways experiencing a mass delusion, um, because they want to believe that we're better than we are, or um, things in this country aren't as bad as they might seem. So I find it extremely fascinating, this idea of the shared veil versus everybody's supposed to look at the world individually with their own veil, whatever they choose, but shared veils are outlawed. Because I think you can sort of look at some of the things that are happening in our reality right now, with this belief in QAnon and whatnot that, man, these people in a lot of ways are sharing an altered reality, you know, despite the fact they're, as far as we know, maybe it's a giant conspiracy I'm not a part of, but as far as I know, none of these Q people have their brains actively connected to the internet and they're not seeing something that I'm not, right? Supposedly they're seeing the world in the same way that I am and experience it in the same way I am, but yet they're coming up with a vastly different experience and reason behind things, whatever. So, despite the fact that this story is in the future, I find it to be super relevant to what's going on today, which isn't, I suppose, the best because I don't really feel like we're in the best situation, and not just this country, but the world overall.
Yeah.
So maybe that's where I felt like, man, a little bit of a bummer in a lot of ways. So again, I know that's what I'm bringing to it, and that's how I'm interpreting it. So I don't want to make it seem like Scott Snyder and Francis Manapul created a bad comic here at all. In fact, it's the exact opposite. I think this is masterfully done. It's technically a very well done comic. Um,
I think that was intentional too, though. I think the way that
yeah,
you
yeah, and it
feel
very
about
yeah.
it, I think was intentional, and I think that's a good thing. I mean, I like this comic because it makes me think that it's not all roses and happy-go-lucky. I mean, there is a consequence when people have when people think stupid things in groups. Dumb things happen. Terrible things happen. I mean,
Yeah,
look, I mean, mass delusions, the mob mentality. I mean, whether it's a mob mentality or a shared veil, it's really the same crap, different pile. And it just goes to show you whether it's a low tech society or a high tech society, even in a high tech computerized society, we can get into the danger of groupthink. And it's a terrible thing, and it doesn't escape us. And it's sad here that this tells the story of an entire society that we're very close to, frankly, where we all like to escape our world on social media. We can escape it on YouTube. We can escape it on Instagram. We can escape. But then we also have those people outside of it who group think. And so we actually have the worst of both worlds if you really want to get depressing about it.
yeah. Well, that's true, but yet in the first issue, there there was something about it where it felt like there was some balance, and I don't even
Yeah.
know if I can necessarily put my finger on what it was. It might have just been because it was something brand new. You know what I mean? Like it was a new series, and I was the one bringing the excitement because because I was thinking about what I wanted to say when we were planning on doing this review. I was like, man, the second issue is really dark. It does introduce some interesting concept. It moves the story along. It introduces this idea of active conspiracies that that Dunes is going to have to unravel. It puts it much more at the forefront. This whole detective part of the story. So what is it about this particular issue where I feel that it's so much darker than the first? Like what, and then flipping that around, going, okay, what wasn't dark about the first issue? Because when I think back and I flip through the first issue again, I'm like, yeah, this is pretty dark too. There's not a lot of hope, as we're sort of getting the story through Dune's eyes, especially after he finds out that his beloved
Yeah.
ex-wife died. Um, so I don't know. I best again, I'll take that on myself as I was bringing some excitement that must have kind of colored my outlook on that first issue. Because yeah, the first issue is just it's very bleak as well in terms of where the story's going. Um, because it's not like when Dunes goes to the DOC, like Rocky was saying, goes to find out information about his wife. Um, he goes in disguise. He doesn't tell the director who he actually is, and despite the fact that he sort of lives in this world of veils, a lot of what he does has to do with veils and whatnot, with spouses cheating on each other and all that kind of stuff. Despite the fact he keeps his setting unclear, um, but yet he seems sort of surprised by the information he gets from the director. When the director's talking about making sure that everybody stays sort of jacked in isn't the only thing that the DOC does. There's another sort of mandate, and that's when he shows them that area that has that tree, and he talks about, what do you see down here in this park where we have this tree? And Dunes talks about the empty spaces. And the director goes on to say that, yeah, our other job at the DOC is to make sure there's clear lines between what is real and what is not. But based on what happens later in the issue, where Dunes is confronted in that park by somebody who looks, or not Dunes rather, but Director Union, later in the issue he's down in that park by the tree and he's confronted by somebody wearing his face. Union is facing himself, and as he's looking, that person, uh, their appearance shifts to look like George Washington, and they kill Union because they're worried, or they make the assumption that Director Union had told Dune something that he shouldn't have.
Isn't and
So
what's the symbology there? Because didn't isn't there a story about George Washington when he was younger, being lying and cutting down a tree or something? I
yeah,
think
so
that image.
supposedly there's an urban legend where George Washington, and I don't know that it was ever made clear why he did this, but yeah, he cut down a cherry tree in his own yard with an axe, and his father comes and asks him,
Yeah,
"Did you cut down this cherry tree?" And he admits it. He says, "Father, I cannot tell a lie.
yeah,
Yes, I did." Which, and supposedly it speaks to taking responsibility. It
yeah,
always sounded like such a dumb story to be like, why would that's hard work? Why is some random kid just going to cut down a cherry tree for the heck of it? Hey, great, you admitted you did something wrong.
yeah.
Um, but
But it's
there,
interesting. It's interesting that that symbol here is used because it's right under the tree, that
yeah, yeah,
and it's George Washington.
yep.
It's I'm sure that I can't help but think that must be intentional use of that image on the part of Snyder.
Well,
But
and he even says, because again, the supposedly the legendary line, "Father, I cannot tell a lie." And when the director says, "No, I didn't tell Dunes anything, that I wasn't supposed to," so immediately start thinking, okay, so was despite Director Union telling Dunes, yeah, our mission here is to make sure people can tell the real world from the veil. That maybe the DOC is actually not fulfilling that part, and they're actually kind of manipulating people. That the whole
mhm,
idea of conspiracy and government.
yeah,
Kind of a deep state doing whatever. So that gives me that impression that some of that is going on here. But when this person, whoever he is, shifts appearance from looking like Union to looking like George Washington, he says, "Come now, director, this is no place for lies." Right? It goes back to
yeah,
that famous line, "Father, I cannot tell a lie." So you wonder how much of Union may have been involved in some sort of conspiracy, and that's sort of the beginning of thinking that there's something big to unravel. And Dunes, right after he left the DOC, he went and met with a friend, and was kind of talking it out, like why was she killed, like what's going on. There's hints that maybe they had a child. There's a picture of a young boy. Maybe that was why they divorced, which is not uncommon. I can only imagine the pain of losing a child as a parent myself, and I could totally see that. If how can you look at your child, like when I look at my daughter, I see so much of my wife in her, right? And sort of vice versa. And so I can only imagine if I lost my daughter, how painful it would be. Every time I would look at my wife, I would think of my daughter and I would think of the loss. So I totally understand when marriages can't withstand the loss of a child. So you wonder, because we don't know Kendra's perspective, but certainly from the perspective of Dunes, he seemed to love his wife very much, and
hmm
really want to solve this mystery. And so based on what he finds there, and he actually plants a bug on his friend, and gets some clues on this 1518 conspiracy or group, and he goes and looks for them, and finds a group of them, and they apparently kill him. Dunes talks about um, being fooled again, right? Like that feeling he had at that moment in the Red War, when, like I was saying earlier, that he was sort of happy, even though a lot of people were happy and couldn't say so, because it was an outward enemy instead of infighting within our own country and between ourselves.
yeah,
And that feeling he had of feeling good about it and being a part of something bigger than himself, and then how that feeling morphed into this feeling of complete despair when those weapons turned around and came back on him. And as he confronts this 1518 mob here, he says, that sense that everything I believed was wrong, I'm feeling that again when I am, I'm like trying to find out what happened to my ex-wife, hoping I'm getting close to answers. And then he's confronted and he thinks, oh, here's that feeling again, that everything I thought is actually wrong. Last time I survived it, I didn't die. This time I did. And they shoot him and he's laying there dead. So what is that? Is that a mass delusion? Does Dunes just think he was shot? Is there some sort of resurrection technology? Is he just wounded and not dead? I mean, that's all part of the cliffhanger ending. But it threw me for a loop. I wasn't expecting that ending. But and again, maybe this is part of why I'm feeling like that. Man, this one's a real bummer. It starts with this idea of the U.S. being, completely getting their butts kicked in a war, and ends with our protagonist being killed.
Yeah.
It's a bummer of an issue, right?
Well, I think maybe reflecting back on it, I think the first issue had more of a it had a crime noir feel to it that
Yeah,
maybe I had sort of visions and sort of ideas of Ed Brubaker and Phillips collaborations and this one this second issue drowned us more and pulled us more into a political world, a quasi political high
yeah,
tech world that is disturbingly similar to our own. And I think that probably accounts for how some feeling of discomfort reading this issue. But again, not in a bad way, but in a way that forces us to sort of take a hard look at ourselves, at our world, and the world in which the veil and the shared veils take place within the context of this story. So, I mean, it's disturbing in my view. I think that for all the right reasons, because it's this is provoking. This I think Snyder wants to make the reader a little uncomfortable here. This should bother us a little bit. This should the more we read about this world, if I think we would all be a little bit strange if we didn't feel a little bit uncomfortable reading it. And
yeah. You
quite
know, you know what's funny is that I think We Have Demons is supposed to be the horror book, right? This
yeah.
is to me, this is way more scary than We Have Demons.
Exactly, potential, yeah. And
Yeah,
you mentioned when he it alludes to the fact that they may have lost a son, that Dunez and his wife Kendra may have lost a son. You got to wonder that if I lost a child, if I lost my daughter, I don't know if I'd want to escape this world either, because this is the world that she lives in. Maybe I wouldn't want to escape into a fantasy world either. Because on the one hand, you might think, well, I want to escape this world because I'm all depressed. I lost a child. On the other hand, maybe Dunez doesn't want to do that because he doesn't want to leave a world where his offspring were in. So you don't know how the impact that loss and grief may have on somebody like that, especially if you lose a child, if that's what happens. So, it's interesting to question, and I just like the character work here. And the beautiful thing is that all that character work, none of that was said. That was all done through Francis Manapul's art. It's
yeah,
what's in the background. That's the beauty of it. It requires no narration, no writing. All of that came through in the art, and that's the beauty of it. And that's why this is just a very effective collaboration between Snyder and Manapul.
yeah. I agree. I think we talked a lot about the first issue when we reviewed it, about that scene in Dune's office, how it really evoked that crime noir, detective pulpy story with the damsel in distress showing up at the detective office. And there's a couple of moments like that in here. I'll talk about it in a second, but I wanted to, before I forget, touch on something you just said there about Dunes wanting to live in our world because that's the world that his son may have lived in. I think you might be onto something there. And I think knowing what we know of Dunes, knowing what we know of the story, the tone and the feel that Manipul and Snyder are going for, I could very much see that part of the reason that Dunes always has his setting on clear is for exactly that reason, not to put a positive spin on it. Maybe because he feels responsible for his son's death, if that's what actually happened. So
Yeah,
when that guilt leads to punishment, I don't deserve to look at the world through rose-colored glasses.
right.
I don't deserve to see the world through a veil because I did something wrong. Maybe he wasn't there when his son died, and he feels responsible in some way, like he could have saved him.
Yeah,
So he's punishing himself, and it also leads me to wonder about, we see him, he puts on a new helmet. His helmet last time got damaged. He puts on a new helmet. When he Before he does that, he puts his handprints on there, and you see the gloves he's wearing. There's a little sort of circle in the middle. So when he puts his handprint on his helmet, there's a little circle in the middle of the palm, which actually looks like an eye. But why is like what's the significance of that? You know what I mean? Like I don't want to see like that sort of typically see no evil. You know, you cover your eyes.
Yeah.
So he's got his hands over his eyes. Like what is the significance of that? So that's kind of interesting. And again, great great visual design. Whether Snyder came up with that or Francis or they came up with it together. The other thing that I love, and maybe this is my own personal bias, having gone to college in the San Francisco Bay Area, the DOC's on Alcatraz Island, which is like this built-up sort of thing, and you see the Golden Gate Bridge, which is the bridge that supposedly Kendra McHale jumped off of to commit suicide. You see it in the background of that, and just this idea of San Francisco, of the Bay Area as the background for the story. Um, I just like that. Again, it's a personal connection for me,
Yeah.
having lived there for years, and um, but beyond that, the other moment. Well, we talked about another one, which was the scene in the park with this sort of clone of Union. Whoever it was that was wearing some sort of disguise to make him look like morphing into George Washington. That was a fantastic moment. And then the other moment that I thought that Francis did incredibly well was the sequence when Dunes does get this hint of where the 1518 mob is, and he heads out, and it's kind of a landfill, and in the future, basically they're putting trash in hollow trees, from what we're understanding. But what I love about the sequence as Dunes heads out on his motorcycle to the sequence, if you look at the way the panels are framed, it's sort of wide open at first. We get this shot of Dunes heading toward this forest. The arbor is what they call it. Arbor meaning tree and nature and whatnot. And it's very much open road with him on his motorcycle. But then as it progresses, as he gets to the arbor, as he starts tracking down and finding where these people are, the panel, like the way he lays them out, it gets more and more claustrophobic. As looking back on it now, we know Dunes is sort of walking to his death if we're to believe the last panel. He's walking down the spiral staircase, and that concept of a spiral staircase, it's closing in on itself. And then he's all of a sudden he finds himself surrounded by this 1518. It just, that feeling of claustrophobia, it the way that Manapul built it out, visually, for the visual storytelling, the sequential story, it went along with both the dialogue, the scripting that Snyder was putting in there, as well as the beat of the story. Right, like Dunes is walking to his death, and the narration leads us down that path, but the visual as well. It's like he's not realizing it, but things are closing in on him. And I thought that was done. That, for me, that's my favorite visual part of the story, because it's a perfect example of the brilliance of what an artist can bring to the story to make it all work together. I mean, you could make an argument that you could remove a lot of the dialogue that Snyder put in these last couple of pages. Um, I mean, you'd lose a little context, because he is bringing in memories of the past, his feeling during the Red War, and how that compares to the feeling now when he's trying to solve his ex-wife's murder. So you'd lose a little bit of that context, but it sort of shows exactly that there isn't dialogue or scripting or anything needed here from Snyder, because what dialogue is there is harkening back to the past.
Yeah.
Scott doesn't have to put any dialogue or any scripting in these pages to describe in any way what is actually happening for Dunes.
Yeah.
Francis Manapul does all the heavy lifting, all the feeling, the sense of dread, claustrophobia. That's all done despite the fact that Scott's actually talking about other things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and
Like it's
Scott's
not just
added, and his dialogue is additive. It doesn't take away from the art. It actually adds
right.
something to it. But like I said, individually, you didn't need the dialogue here. Manipal did a fantastic job, but the fact that Snyder did add dialogue, normally sometimes that takes away. It's not always additive dialogue. Sometimes it has a negative effect. But like I say, it's a good collaboration here. It really is.
Yeah, because again, it's instead of Scott telling us things that we don't need to know because we can see them. He's pulling from Dune's past to kind of juxtapose what's happening, or draw similarities. Maybe it might be a better way to put it. Draw similarities between these bombs coming, this idea of weapons coming back, this idea of choices that we've made, as a country coming back on us.
Mhm.
The choice that the choices Dunes make maybe are coming back on him by him choosing to go down this path alone, and it ends up coming back on him, and he's eventually shot. So yeah, fantastic. I can't say enough good things about it. As disturbing as it is, or as uncomfortable as it is, but to Rocky's point earlier, I think that's got to be exactly what the point was of this issue. From Francis and Scott, they want to make us uncomfortable. They
Well, and
want the
not only
reader to
that,
be
what
uncomfortable.
what's really disturbing is I look at this gang, this 1518 gang that ostensibly appears to have killed Dunez at the end of this issue. it I gotta wonder who, they share a veil. I mean, there's this shared veiling. Who controls the shared veil? Because if you can control what a massive amount of people see, who controls what all these people in the mob that are sharing the same veil, the same fantasy, living the same illusion? Who controls that? That's where the power lies. And so, the big question is who's the big bad guy behind it all? Is it really is it the DOC, the Department of Connectivity? Is it the government? Is it China? Is it what really began the Red War? Is it related to that? There's all kinds of very interesting questions here. And the thing is, we talked about Dunez potentially losing a child. So we got these deeply personal character moments, but we could also, for all we know, next issue we could delve into a larger political international espionage narrative for all we know. But yeah, we could also have some deeply personal character moments. It could go either way. So I'm really captivated by this. I don't know where this story is going to go, but I'm really captivated by it because really, if when you look at what the plot point is here, he's just investigating the death of his wife. And yet, when you think about it, oh my God, this could involve something that is quite epic and worldwide in scope. And that's very difficult to pull off, but Snyder and Manapul managed to do it. So, I mean, again, I don't know how anybody could not be captivated by this.
Yeah, again, so many questions to be asked. And one of the things I thought about when we see the 1518 gang, and it's like it may not even be, when at that moment of confrontation, Dunes is like, hold on, I just want to. He just wants to talk to them. He's not necessarily their enemy, but they don't want to hear it. And it's this idea that even now, at least in this country, you have red versus blue or Democrat versus Republican or whatever, and really that's all the people at the highest level want, is to keep us fighting amongst ourselves, because then we won't turn on the 1% that has all the power.
Hmm.
Neither side actually believes the political rhetoric that they're espousing. The whole idea of it is just keep everybody preoccupied in the lower classes, keep them preoccupied fighting amongst themselves,
In
so
their
that we
own
can.
veils, in their own
Yeah,
echo chamber, their own veil.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So we can
yeah,
just sit back and keep getting rich. We don't
yeah.
actually care what they're fighting about. As long as their focus is on each other, they won't realize that we're over here, living the good life as fat cats taking advantage. So yes, and that could very well be magnified in this world, of Clear, where things are sort of falling apart. I mean, it certainly doesn't look like this 1518 mob. I mean, they're living in a garbage dump, right? I
Yeah.
mean, they're not in the lap of luxury here. So,
But they don't
yeah, I
know
mean,
that if they're in the veil, right? That's the thing, is you can live anywhere if you're living in illusion under a veil, right?
yeah, but I mean, it's still going to smell bad, I would think.
I don't know. I don't know the effect. Doesn't the veil affect on what you smell too? It doesn't affect all your senses.
I don't know.
I don't know.
It's a good question. How much is it just the skin and the way you see the world, and how much is it like Star Trek holodeck, right? Where you
Yeah.
can actually feel and whatever. Yeah. So anyway, that's Clear number two. It's absolutely fantastic. It's again, it's hard to say. I talked about it when we talked about We Have Demons, where whenever I try to choose my favorite Best Jacket title, it's whatever it's whichever one I read last, because I think they're all fantastic. And I totally agree with what Rocky was saying about Francis's work here. It's brilliant. It's so good, and I think a lot of that. I'll give a lot of credit to Francis for realizing this world fully, with the fact that not only is he doing the line work, he's doing the colors. I think that really helps to set the tone, and it gets across that emotion, like that feeling of claustrophobia. Not to say a brilliant color artist working with Francis couldn't have done the same thing and brought that impending sense of doom or claustrophobia, but I think we're getting the most closely to what Francis is seeing in his head when he's drawing the story, when he's doing the colors himself. So I don't want to sell him short and talk about what great design work and storytelling he's doing, and not credit him for the great job he did doing on colors as well. I mean, the whole visual, from the line work to the textures to the backgrounds to the color work, it's all done fantastic. So, yeah, this was a great issue. Highly recommend it. Don't forget, you can subscribe to Comixology Unlimited, and you can get all the Comixology originals, as well as the 40,000 plus library of books. And it's the most cost efficient way to be able to check all these out, as opposed to paying $4.99 for each individual issue, which you can do if that's your choice. Or if you have Amazon Prime, you have access to all of the Comixology originals as well through your Prime account. But I don't think you get guided view, because Rocky's talked about before how great guided view is, because it sort of prevents you from seeing the whole double page spread. So the surprises come even more impactfully. I have the Comixology app on my iPad, and I looked for guided view, but it wasn't there. So I think because I when I tried to go through the Comixology app, I didn't have access to these because I don't have Comixology Unlimited. So I ended up having to go through the Amazon Kindle Reader, and I don't think that supports the guided view. So I probably, and I've been meaning to, I probably just need to bite the bullet and get the subscription, because I think it's only like $6 a month, so well worth it. So I can get the guided view. So I tried Rocky. I told you I tried to do the guided view. I wanted to
Well,
see the difference.
well, the guided view. I mean, I'll give you a little bit of an example here, but I mean, this is how it plays out as you're reading it. It goes from panel to panel, and you can't cheat, and it just it moves, and it just shows you panel to panel. So, and it focuses. It even cuts off other word balloons, and it tells you, even if you're not sure. Because I know some people. My wife sometimes complains she doesn't know how to read comics because she doesn't know which panels to go to first, and I always poke fun at her a little bit. But she gets frustrated with some comics. But with the guided view, it just really spoon feeds you, and you get the close-ups, and it blows up on the screen. And when you have a big screen like I do, I mean, it's really pays dividends. And you see the when he opens up a letter, you can see all the things that he's looking at in detail, and again, you get more of a movie like feel to it, and it just sort of it takes you along, and you can go at your own pace, and it feels really good that way. And it reads better in my mind, and it's just a much more satisfying experience. And in fact, when I go downstairs sometimes in my big screen TV, if I put it on my big screen, I have a 42-inch screen, which is small by today's standards because everyone seems to have a 100-inch TV. But anyways, I find it really enjoyable, and I would, again, the guided view. I'm a huge fan of that.
Yeah, and I can tell just by the icons that are on the bottom of your screen there, if anybody's watching us on YouTube. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
definitely the Comixology app. So
sure.
again,
Yeah,
it's yeah, the guided views I think is unique to that app, at least for now. I know that there was some news that came out today actually. So you know, Comixology got bought by Amazon a couple of years ago, and they were supposed to be integrating everything more into one sort of seamless experience between Amazon and Comixology. But that's all been delayed now until next year. So I wonder if at some point, because everybody was supposed to get a new Comixology app, just kind of more integrated with Amazon, I think. So probably a way for them to put ads where you can click on something and order it directly. Here's a can of Coke, and you can order Coke right here by clicking in the comic. So wouldn't surprise me, but yeah, it looks like I'll need to subscribe, which I will do. That's my promise to all you listeners and you, Rocky. I will subscribe to Comixology Unlimited before, because I really want to experience the second issue of Night of the Ghoul in that guided view, because
uh,
that series almost feels like jump scares waiting to happen. So I
yeah,
definitely want to experience that panel to panel. But
absolutely.
all right, as we're winding up here, Rocky, any last thoughts on Clear number two?
No, I'm just another compliment. It's nice to be. I'm continuously happy with Snyder's Scott Tober. It was October. Scott
Yeah.
Tober started off three great series by Scott Snyder, collaborating with different artists, and boy, man, it just continues to entertain me. So kudos to Snyder and Manapul, and I'm drawing a or Greg Capullo and Francis Francavilla. I mean, just great collaborations, and I encourage people to go to Comixology and, like you said, subscribe monthly because it's well worth it. As you say, just to read these comics alone, because you get all that just for a low price of whatever it is, $5 or $6.99 a month.
Yeah, and I'm excited for the books that are coming.
Yeah.
So I think I mentioned when we recorded the last one that we're hoping to have Scott on soon. I actually had a conversation with him just the other night. So the same day this is coming out, there will also be an interview with Scott. We talked for almost 2 hours about these books in particular, and also about what's to come. We had to cut it a little bit short, but man, just hearing him talk, the excitement about the upcoming books. Canary with Dan Panosian. Um, that's one I'm really looking forward to. The Barnstormer story with Tula Ote, which that art looks
Uh,
just absolutely
she's a
fantastic.
great
Book of
artist, Tula Tay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Book of Evil with Jock, which is sort of an illustrated prose piece, which is a fascinating concept. We're in the world when by the time everybody's an adult, like 98% of people are psychopaths, which is really terrifying. So, but yeah, there's a ton of others. Um, so go listen to that interview with Scott, or watch it on our YouTube channel, on the Comic Source YouTube channel. And yeah, we're hoping to have Scott on a regular basis going forward as these books start to come out. And I'm really curious to see the impact when they hit print, because I know a lot of people still are a little bit resistant to digital. So from what Scott told me, We Have Demons is supposed to come out in March, and then this book, Clear, will see print for the first time in April, and then Night of the Ghoul in May, and all that. So yeah, all the details are there. Go check out the interview. It was fantastic to catch up with Scott. It'd been a while since we had him on the show, and yeah, check out these books. Like Rocky was saying, it's a great value at $5.99 or $6.99, whatever it is. Basically, for the price of one book, you can get all the Comixology originals, not just the Best Jacket stuff, but the other books. Chip Zdarsky has a new vampire book out, where vampire decides to become a superhero. He's out at night anyway. Why not? Um, and
Yeah.
and and that's in addition to all the 40,000 plus books in the library that are from traditional publishers, Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, Image, all those. So go check it out. Don't forget, if you're listening to us on the audio only podcast, head over to YouTube and give Rocky's channel a subscription. It's Comic Space Boom ! Like this video, ring the notification bell so you know when new content's coming out. Conversely, if you're joining us on the Comic Boom channel and you want to be sure you don't miss any of the content we put out on the Comic Source podcast, just go to your favorite podcasting app or favorite podcasting platform on your smart device and do a search for the Comic Source and give us a subscribe. So we appreciate the support, and for you guys joining us as always. Hope you enjoyed Clear as much as we did, and we'll talk to you next time.
See you later.